It's a very difficult situation. The situation of the environmental defenders, they get attacked, they get kidnapped, they get jailed, and they really need legal defense against cases against them, but they also need to bring cases against those who attack them. You know, we think it's very important that defenders fight back by bringing complaints against judges, corrupt judges, against prosecutors who, instead of bringing charges against the attackers, bring charges against the victims. Indigenous peoples are living in their territories, and sometimes they are not aware of some of the threats. So when they find about the threats, it's, you know, the threat is already at their door. And, you know, there's not legal advice available. You know, some NGOs do provide that, but it's rare. So most times they have to count on public attorneys from, you know, institutions. It depends on the country. There is Defensoria del Pueblo, there is Ministério Público in Brazil. So yeah, and they also don't have resources to pay for private lawyers. I think legal advice is important, and communities should try to find lawyers to bring their cases, because it's a difficult situation to have to find resources to find a lawyer to defend themselves, but they have to do, because, you know, it may take years, but they may win the case, and it will set a precedent for other cases, and this is the only way we'll change things. One of the only ways. Over these last 20 years, we have evolved in the way we bring cases. At first, we only brought cases defending the criminalized defenders, right? So we focused on the emergency situation. Then we began focusing on the root causes of that attack against defenders. So we began working on land rights cases, which, you know, are the basis for the conflict. Or we began working on cases in which the construction of a dam is what is creating the problem. So how to challenge the construction of the dam? What are the human rights violations there? It could be a mine as well. It could be a road in the forest. And, you know, we have brought many such cases. And each one brings a different lesson. And I consider that every case is a success, even if we don't win in court, because in a way, just the fact that you bring the case, you raise the awareness on this issue, it is important. In general, communities and NGOs reach out to us because they need help, you know, in finding lawyers or resources for the lawyers, or strategic advice related to the legal issues, or an expert. But we also receive information from newsletters and colleagues. So when we learn about a situation in which we think we can help, we get in touch. We have cases arising in Latin America and cases in, you know, other parts of the world. In general, it's in the global south that we work. So I work mainly on the cases arising in Latin America, and our director on the cases in other parts of the world. And for each case, of course, we cannot litigate ourselves on the cases. I am a Brazilian attorney, and I could be the attorney in charge of, you know, cases in Brazil only. Our model is that we create a team for a case. So we find the lawyer, we hire the lawyer, the expert, sometimes there is an anthropologist, and this will be the team for the case. And this way, we keep our organization small, and we work on specific cases as needed. One of our biggest cases was a case that we brought in Sweden in relation to toxic waste that a Swedish company sent in the 80s to Chile. And that waste was sitting there for many years and caused a lot of illnesses, and in addition to environmental contamination. And we got involved in this case because our former director watched a documentary about it. And this documentary was produced by a Swedish young guy who was born in Chile but was adopted by a Swedish family, and his father worked for this firm, and he heard about that situation of the waste being sent there to Chile. We moved mountains to bring this case in Sweden with there were 800 plaintiffs, but of course they created an association of plaintiffs, and it was really challenging for an NGO like ours, which is not a huge NGO, to bring this case with very qualified lawyers. And we didn't win in the end in court, but this is a case in which we were able to prove that the company was wrong in the eyes of the public. There is also another documentary that was produced about this. It's called Arica. So in Brazil, we realized that the main problem related to climate change is deforestation. Everyone knows that it's the most important cause of greenhouse gas emissions, and then it's agriculture and cattle farming. People from Europe, for example, think it's coal, it's energy production or transportation, but well, in Brazil it's different, it's deforestation. And in Brazil there is a law from 2009, but it established a limit for the deforestation in the Amazon to the year 2020, and the limit in square kilometers was 3,925 square kilometers. It was a calculation that was made based on an average of deforestation from previous years. But the fact is, the law says the government had to reach that amount in 2020. And it didn't. It was much more. So in 2020, I believe it was over 7,000, then the following year over 10,000, and the following year, which is the last year, over 13,000. We brought a lawsuit against the Brazilian government, asking the court to order the government to keep the deforestation rate at the level accepted by the legislation, or if not, to restore all the forest that was cut in excess. And this case is pending before the court, the federal court in Curitiba. And Curitiba is in the south of Brazil, it's far from the Amazon, and you may ask, so why did you file your case in Curitiba? We filed it in the south because we can file in Brazil anywhere before a federal court. You can file a case when the impacts occur at the national level. And of course, climate change impacts affect the country as a whole, and of course has no boundaries. In this case, we have obtained a very interesting decision from an appeals court, which says that our case is different than other environmental cases, because our case is an environmental case, but it's also a climate case. So in our case, the judge should apply all the legal framework related to climate change. And we have requested an injunction in that case, and we are waiting for a response. And let me tell you why an injunction is very important in this case, because if we don't begin restoring the forest right now and we just leave things as they are, the case could be, could take many years to be solved, and ruling could take many years. So it may be impossible to restore the forest after so many years. We always cite in briefs that we present in court all of the documents of, from the UN, from the Inter-American system, all those, comments and recommendations and precedents are really relevant, because sometimes the judges in, a small court, in, a trial court in the countryside in one of these countries is not aware of these documents. So it is important to bring them. But the main problem that I see is that sometimes the courts take too long to decide, and they push the decisions for later. Let me give you the example of the construction of the Belo Monte Dam in Brazil. In this case, it is a dam affecting at least 2 indigenous communities, which are very close to an area that was going to be dry because the river was going to be diverted. There were several cases in court, and the courts decided that the right to be consulted would be respected in due time. Then the environmental authorities went visit the communities, and they said, this is just a visit, this is not a consultation. Later, they claimed that the visits had been the consultation. And then, when it was time for a permit to be granted to the company building the dam, the authorities within the government, who were supposed to read the documents and analyze the documents related to consultation, they said, well, we didn't have time to read through the material. We recommend that this license not be granted. And then the head of the environmental agency just granted the license 1 day later. So what the courts did about that, delayed that decision for many, many years. So it's something that needs to change. Even if we get the best legislation and the best documents, if they are applied too late, then it's just a situation in which there can be compensation, remediation, but the rights have not been respected.